All organisms that we know of grow and reproduce, and that reproduction is done using DNA. DNA is the information or the instruction book for the cell. So, unlike us, we go read a book and then we know what to do. Our cell uses DNA to know what to do. Those are the instructions it gets. And single-celled organisms will often absorb matter, eat, until they get bigger, and then they at some point decide they're big enough that they want to become two, and they duplicate their DNA and split in half. Humans are more complicated, right? We make sperm and egg cells when we decide we want to reproduce and decide we don't physically think about this. Our bodies do this. So you get sperm and egg cells, then you have to figure out how to get them stuck together. Then the baby grows in mom for a few months. Then you have to get the baby out. Then you have to take care of it for a long time. According to my mother, you never quit taking care of it. So a more complicated life cycle. And then our life cycle is easy compared to a malaria. So malaria is caused by a eukaryotic organism known as a plasmodium. How does a plasmodium work? Well, a mosquito will take a blood meal from a person, and when it sucks up the blood, if the person is infected with malaria, it will also suck up these sporozoites. So these will migrate to a liver cell, then they reproduce in the liver cell, eventually producing a structure that ruptures and it goes into the blood cell where it can continue reproducing in various forms. Eventually, it makes a gametocyte, which are kind of the sperm and eggs. It moves those around for a while. Eventually, another mosquito bites this poor person. And in parts of Africa, you can get 100 infectious bites a day. It's terrible. So then the mosquito pulls out the gametocytes and they end up moving into the salivary glands of the mosquito and joining together and growing in the salivary glands, forming an oocyst, and then releasing more sporozoites, and you keep going, right? Do I care you can do that? No. Did I get to do a great job of explaining that? Probably not, but watch the diagram, right? The point is there's a lot of really complicated things to grow and reproduce. How else might you know if it's alive? You maintain homeostasis. And homeostasis, homeo means same, right? So you want to keep your body the same or pretty similar. What do we mean by that, right? You're like, oh, I change all the time. Well, yeah, I change all the time, but there's certain things that are really important for us. So, for example, us humans, this is me in Zion a few years ago. But it was 100 degrees, and I went on a couple of mile hike in the sun, climbed up, 1,500 feet of elevation, got to Angel's Landing, and it turns out if my body temperature gets to more than like 101, 102, I'm really, really sick, right? Even at 101, 102 Fahrenheit, I'm not feeling very good. And if I alternatively, like I did the day before, I did the Narrows in Zion and you're walking in water that was about 58 degrees. It turns out I was trying not to get hypothermia because if I get to 96, I'm probably not feeling so well. And by the time I get to 90, I'm in terrible shape, right? So I have a very, very small range of temperatures where I'm happy. Now, not all organisms are this bad, right? Yeast can live at a much higher variety of temperatures and not die, but I need to use mechanisms to keep myself at a constant temperature. And I do this by sweating. I do this by opening and closing my capillary, my small blood vessels, to try to get blood close to the surface to release heat, for example. That's why I'm super red in this picture. So there's a lot of things that are going on to keep my inside of me, distinct from the outside environment. If you're a turtle, you don't maintain your body temperature by doing internal things. You are reliant on the environment. So these turtles keep moving on to logs to sun to warm up, and if they're getting too hot, then they jump back into the water. So they regulate by moving, whereas we regulate by doing our physiology. Also, it's important to keep the appropriate amount of salt in our bodies. So those little bean things or kidneys, they're really important in maintaining the appropriate amount of salt. We also need to maintain a blood pH, which we do by breathing out CO2. And so there's a lot of our systems that we maintain at a very, very narrow range of chemistry that keeps our bodies happy and alive and distinct from the outside world. How else do we know if it's alive? It consumes matter and energy. What does that mean? It means that life somehow picks up energy. So things that allow you to do work, things that allow you to grow, things that allow you to move, things that allow you to think, and matter. So sugar and proteins and all those physical molecules that make us bigger, we can absorb those and then transform them into ourselves. For example, plants do all sorts of things that we can't do at all. The light energy that comes from the sun, and we know there's energy in the sun because you get sunburns if you sit out in it. You get hot if you sit in the sun, but plants don't just get hot when they sit in the sun. They're able to pick up that energy along with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and turn it into sugar, right? They eat by just sitting outside. It's pretty cool. And then their waste product is oxygen. And then if you're a cow or a human or anything else that eats plants, they consume the matter and they consume the energy in the form of the bonds between those atoms. And then they can do whatever cows do. And then, as my friend Lydia says, well, then we eat the cow because really, why would you eat salad when you can go ahead and eat the cow, right? So we are ultimately eating matter and energy that was put together by the sun. So we are ultimately eating energy that was converted into a usable form by plants. And most life on Earth ultimately is kept up by sunshine, although there's some hydrothermal vents in the deep ocean that actually work on a whole different process, using hydrogen sulfide as one of their base molecules and using the heat from these hydrothermal vents as the energy source. But most life on Earth is kept up by sunshine. The last characteristic of life that we talk about is that life evolves. And you're going to say, oh, Dr. Ward, we did this. Remember, we did adaptation, natural selection, pepper moth. I couldn't see that white one. Like, yep, you got it. But there's a second part or a third part of evolution. And while natural selection is really important, there's other things that are important. One is sexual selection. So these are all birds of paradise. They're all super pretty, right? But why would having two little long tail feathers that you can hold like a half heart over your head or being bright blue be helpful, right? Seems like that would make you really, really yummy to a predator. Nice and easy to see. Well, it turns out it's not just good enough that you survive, you also need to be able to reproduce. So, sexual selection are those traits that are involved not in survival of the fittest, but in survival of the sexiest. So, how do you get a mate? And there's also this unfortunate thing of chance. So sometimes life just doesn't treat you well, right? Sometimes you just have a really bad day, and if you're a bug, you get squished. Lightning strikes. You're a tree that happened to land on a fault line, and the San Andreas Fault moved, and you fell in. It's a bad day. And there's a fair amount of chance that happens in evolution, and we'll talk about what these sort of chance events look like. So life evolves, life changes. A lot of that has to do with natural selection, but there are other selection pressures and just chance involved.